So yeah, I feel bad for him, but like I said, I just feel bad for him because I just want him to do amazing. I don't think it changes anything about his legacy, and anybody who says it does literally just doesn't hasn't been paying attention for the whole year.
The biggest talking point for the entire weekend, if not the week, if not the last 2 weeks, was the fact that Sebastian Vettel has now left Formula One.
Mhm.
But he wasn't the only driver to leave. There was also Daniel Ricciardo, who has left. Mick Schumacher has been shunted out of Haas and been replaced by ex Aston Martin reserve Nico Hulkenberg. And you've also got Nicholas Latifi, who has been underperforming for forever. Williams, who is no longer a driver on the F1 grid for next year. I think they do have the best driver pairing. Obviously, there were other teams that had rivalries, namely Alpine with
Yeah,
Fernando and Esteban.
I literally was gonna say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alonso and Ocon, Jesus Christ, they got to the end. Like, I'm surprised.
Hello and welcome back to On the Chicane. You're here with me, Mariam, and my co-host Paris, and we are about to give you the rundown on the last race of the 2022 season, which was the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix at Yas Marina Circuit. Um, the end of a very long season,
Yeah.
uh, a very, I guess you could say, not the most exciting season. It was, yeah, neither here nor there.
It was
Um,
midi. It was very mid.
Yeah, it was very mid. But we finally reached the end of the season, and yeah, I mean, there were a few talking points, a few key things, a few major moments. But overall, I think the race was kind of lacking a bit. I mean, nothing's ever going to compare to the season finale last year, but also people remember that for good and bad reasons.
How did you
But
feel going into the weekend, like after last year?
to be fair, like I was a little bit nervous, but not for any particular reason because obviously we went into season last year literally with both uh leaders neck on neck,
Mm,
but we didn't have that this year. So I was kind of like, why am I so nervous about this race? But I think it was just like some sort of ghost
trauma.
from last year. Yeah, literally trauma. Um, but yeah, like it was fine. I was kind of just like, let's just get this over and done with now because
Yeah.
it's been a long season. And when you're working the race weekends as well, you're kind of just like, I'm over it now. So yeah, I think the majority of us were ready to just put this behind us.
Mm.
How about you? How did you feel about it?
I mean, I think I know that Abu Dhabi is not the most exciting race anyway. So I wasn't expecting much from a season where, it's already wrapped up the title championship, it's already wrapped up the constructors championship. So there's not that much going into the weekend. And I think the biggest hype was obviously um, Checo and Charles, Checo v Charles. But at the same time, I didn't really I like both drivers and I didn't really have much chops. Like neither of them, Ferrari's not my favorite team, it's one of your favorite teams, but I just think they're and I rate Checo highly. So for me it was just like two good drivers going against each other, but it didn't have that zing for me. I think both Charles and Checo have great skill and it could lead to some really great battles. But like I said last week, that would be dependent on them being in the same position, like right next to each other in the race. So yeah, for me it was just like a bit of a non-race. I'm not gonna lie, I totally missed the start of the race because I completely got the time wrong. I thought it was 2 p.m. and it was 1 p.m. So I actually missed the first few laps and I had to go back and watch them. Um, but yeah, it was a bit of a dull race, I think, in the sense that, like I said, there just wasn't very much jeopardy, and I think most of it came from Max's statement last week.
Yeah, I think Abu Dhabi is always kind of one of those races that's like it's not really going to be the most exciting because at this point the championship is usually kind of decided. I
Mm,
mean, we have had a few really exciting races like Rosberg versus Hamilton, and obviously last year, like in recent years, it has given us something. But generally speaking, you kind of go into Abu Dhabi and you're like, okay, fine, all right circuit, all right race, just get me to the last lap where I can see the donuts and we can just start celebrating, right? Um, I guess for me, I was excited about the whole Leclerc Perez thing only because I'm a big Leclerc fan,
yeah,
and I think given how the season's gone, the odds were kind of stacked against Charles because
they were.
Red Bull have just been stronger. They've just been stronger. So you had Ferrari who started off the season looking like they were going to be championship contenders. And then slowly but surely, Red Bull kind of dominated, and we kind of lost that a little bit from Ferrari. So for me, going into this race and knowing that Charles and Perez were neck on neck and seeing how that might play out, like obviously I wanted Charles to win, but the logical part of my brain was like, it's going to be Perez. Like Perez has
Yeah,
obviously got this.
he's got the
And
better
then
car. He's had the better season.
yeah, and then obviously the season played out as it did, and Charles won. He kind of
Yeah,
came second, and it was like a massive deal for me as a Ferrari fan and as a Leclerc fan. So I think in that sense, the
yeah.
race kind of delivered, but it also made me like question, go back to Brazil and think about what had happened there with Max not listening to team orders and not helping out his teammates. So I feel like there was a bit of drama there.
Do you think that Max could have backed Charles up into Perez and helped Perez in that way? I mean, I know you're glad that he didn't, but considering what we know from what he said last week and how we know that people can race, like you can back a driver up without compromising your own race.
Probably. Um, I've kind of given up expecting anything from Max. I feel like Brazil was just a like literal set in stone. Okay, this is just the kind of guy that Max is. Don't ever have any expectations from him because of the way that he treated his teammates. So I feel like to see that there was opportunity there for Max to be able to help his teammate and he didn't
Yeah.
do it, like, am I surprised? No, not really. Um,
Did
and
you
yeah, I am
see
glad.
Did you see
Sorry.
the did you see the cutout of the Red Bull garage done by that artist on I think he does it on like Imager or something like that. His name's Richard Parry, and he does this like amazing cutaway of the garages for F1. So he had like so many Red Bull shady. I don't know if you could call them shady. Like some of them were shady, but honestly, I just think it's hilarious. Like he had like a little stage with the pit stop boys doing Max, Max, Super Max. And then like when it came to Perez, on the back of his car, he had like a tow hook for like all the times that Perez has towed Max. And then there was a poster and it basically said in Mexican, like teamwork makes the dream work, but it had like Max in the middle of the poster and like Perez was like small behind him. And I just thought it was just it's literally just the best thing ever. If you haven't seen it, like head to our Twitter because I reposted it and I retweeted it and I screen grabbed like my favorite bits of it. Even had like employees of the month, and for December 2021, it had Latifi.
Oh my God. See, I haven't seen it, but that does sound so shady.
It's
So
so funny. It's just got the best moments. Definitely, if you haven't seen it, go and look at it. But it just reminded me of you saying, like, when you were like, I just don't expect anything of Max. Like, it's just really, it's gonna get to the point next year where I think it's gonna come to a really big catastrophe.
yeah. It'll be interesting to see if it does, because I feel like Max kind of has that with every teammate that he has at Red Bull. And I feel like it's quite impressive that it's taken this long for anything major to happen between Checo and Max, because yeah, I mean, I don't know. We all know Max is Red Bull's golden boy, so it will be interesting to see how their teamwork and whatever kind of plays out next year, especially given like how many times Checo has helped out Max throughout the season. And then the one time that Checo really needed it, Max didn't really do what he needed to do. So I wonder how that will impact Checo's driving next year.
Yep. And I definitely think him not backing up Charles is gonna like play on Checo's mind, because I think he's gonna think, wow, you actually could have done a little something there and you did absolutely nothing. I remember Checo came from behind from like 18 seconds deficit and he had to like carve that away and he got so close, but Charles just had the better race. For once, Ferrari did the thing.
I know, for once their tyre strategy and pit stops and blah, blah, blah all kind of worked out in their favour. I think Charles was one of few drivers who was on a one-stopper, if I'm not wrong. I could be making that up. So yeah, for once strategy actually played into their hands as they would have wanted. So well done, Ferrari. I'm happy because I love Ferrari. But yeah, I guess moving on to other things that happened within the race. One of the big things is that Lewis Hamilton didn't manage a race win this season, and was actually beaten by his teammate George Russell in the driver standings. How does that make you feel?
I mean, I feel really, really sad for him. I don't think it changes anything about his legacy though. Like, I think people will see it as like I don't even think it's on par with Lewis coming in and beating Alonso. I don't think it's anything like that because, as we've said throughout the whole year, we've acknowledged that, you know, the first few races, Lewis literally was like loading his car with sensors and trying every which kind of strategy. And we know that even all of them, the Mercedes team have said it is like the reason that they've managed to get to the end of the year and George was able to, you know, fight for the win that he's got was because of Lewis. So I feel like had Lewis been selfish at the beginning of the year rather than going for the team, he probably would have beaten George on points at least, even if neither of them ever won a race. But so can you imagine that? Like if say he didn't do the sensor thing and he didn't try and get the car better, they would have just had a shit car for the whole year, been somewhere in the midfield, and chances are he would have just because he consistently outpaced George, even though he didn't out qualify or out score him at the end of the races, but he consistently outpaced George. And I think, you know, had they just kind of gone on with a mid-level car, he probably would have got more points, but they would have just been somewhere completely like behind McLaren, behind Alpine or something like that.
I see what you're saying.
So yeah, I feel bad for him, but like I said, I just feel bad for him because I just want him to do amazing. I don't think it changes anything about his legacy, and anybody who says it does literally just doesn't hasn't been paying attention for the whole year. Um, and I'm happy for George. Like I'm genuinely happy for George. I think, you know, he's a really good racer and he's really deserves his seat.
Yeah, I think what's actually really nice to see is that George is actually someone who actually respects Lewis.
Yeah.
He's not there to kind of, you can see that George obviously is hungry because he's young, he's fresh in the sport, he wants titles, he wants podiums, but you can see that he's not willing to, I mean, he is still very much a rookie, but you can see that he's got that respect for the team and for the legacy that Lewis has built and for how the team have built themselves up. And you can see that he's like willing to wait it out rather than wanting to sabotage Lewis or step on anyone's toes. So I think they do have quite a nice little team going on there. And yeah, I'm really happy.
A good question that I want to ask you actually. Who do you think had the best driver pairing on the grid this year?
I feel like I want to give it to them too.
They're really good, right?
They're really good together. There doesn't, I mean, like I say, it's still early. George is still very much a newbie in Mercedes, whereas Lewis is probably coming to the end of his career. But they seem to have a mutual respect, and they're not in competition with each other. They're both there because they want the best for the team. Um, and then anything that kind of they get on top of that is a bonus. Obviously, Lewis has kind of made his name, whereas George is still trying to make his name.
Mm.
So I feel like he's got a lot to learn from Lewis, and Lewis is kind of, it seems like he's happy to kind of pass on the
Yeah.
baton. He was like, when George did win his race, he was like, I'm really happy for George, and like, yeah. So I think they do have the best driver pairing. Obviously, there were other teams that had rivalries, namely Alpine with
Yeah.
Fernando and Esteban.
I literally was gonna say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alonso and Ocon, Jesus Christ, they got to the end. Like, I'm surprised they didn't butt heads. It's also making it like a bit spicy for next year when it comes to Ocon and Pierre and Alonso and Stroll. Because Stroll sometimes he gets a bit kamikaze, and I think Alonso is going to get really frustrated by that.
I am actually really intrigued to see how it's going to play out next season for Stroll and Alonso, because I feel like,
The
yeah, they've
dynamic's going to
obviously
be
had a few
wild.
incidents this season with the two of them. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work. Obviously, Aston Martin are on a mission to this 5-year goal that they've got. So I don't know if I'm expecting big improvements on their car next year, but if they do manage to make those improvements, then
Mm.
what does it mean for? I mean, obviously, Stroll is hungry. He's been sat there waiting for time, trying
Yep,
to get podium positions and blah blah blah. So he's hungry. Alonso's feisty. He's not going to just move
roll
aside for his
over.
yeah.
Yep.
So that will definitely be interesting. But even so, as you said, with Ocon and Gasly, like they've got apparently some sort of rivalry, which they say they've put aside and they're willing to focus on next year and being a team, working for the team and whatever. But how will that actually translate when it comes to the close racing? And yeah, I don't know. It's just I'm quite looking forward to the drama for next season.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think George and Lewis are definitely the strongest pair on the grid. I think Charles and Carlos are a very, very close second. I think they've had a bit of bad luck this year, and the Ferrari started off as a really strong car. I remember it was like the strongest car that we had at the beginning of the season, and then it just kind of fell down a little bit. So I think had they had maybe a really strong car for the entire season, they could have edged out George and Lewis as the team. Because actually, I think Carlos and Charles do work quite well together, and they actually do support each other. They don't try and take away from each other, and they just weirdly have like alternative weekends where they have bad luck. Um, and then who else have you got? Like Kira and Yuki, the sweetest, most perfect couple off like on social media off the grid. But obviously they don't, I wouldn't say they work together to achieve anything. Kevin and Mick, similar situation, like Kevin's on his thing, Mick's on his thing, and Mick's obviously no longer on the grid. Um, Stroll and Vettel, actually not too bad of a team. They actually worked quite well together this year. And then Alonso and Ocon, no, just not a great team together. Danny, Rick, and Norris, again, no, not a great team. And as we have recently found out, Max and Checo, who I would have put near the top, clearly are near the bottom because apparently they hate each other and we didn't know. So yeah, I'm interested to know what other people think, who their top drivers are, like top driver pairing for the year.
Yeah. Um, I guess regarding the actual race on Sunday, there wasn't really much else to know or to talk about. It was, like we said, a bit of a mid-race, a bit of a mid-season. But the biggest talking point for the entire weekend, if not the week, if not the last 2 weeks, was the fact that Sebastian Vettel has now left Formula One.
Mhm.
But he wasn't the only driver to leave. There was also Daniel Ricciardo, who has left. Mick Schumacher has been shunted out of Haas and been replaced by ex Aston Martin reserve Nico Hulkenberg. And you've also got Nicholas Latifi, who has been underperforming for forever. Williams, who is no longer a driver on the F1 grid for next year. So we said goodbye to a lot of familiar faces.
Mhm.
As we welcome in a lot of new rookies for next season. We've got Nick De Vries joining, Logan Sargent, Who else is there?
Piastri, Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, Piastri. So there's a lot of new rookies joining next year. But I guess the biggest two names that everyone kept talking about was Vettel and Ricciardo.
Mm.
So Sebastian Vettel, 4 world championships, countless records, countless podiums, 299 race starts. He didn't quite make it to 300,
It's the
but
COVID. If
209,
he hadn't had the COVID,
yeah, 299 race starts, and he has retired.
maybe he'll
Um,
do like one special race next year just to make it 300. It annoys me that it's not 300.
I feel like he's not bothered. Um, but yeah, I'm really sad. I think everyone knows that I love Seb. Um, Always going to be a big fan of his, especially considering how much he's grown and matured over the last 2 years and how much he's pushed for external causes and tried to raise awareness, especially on things like the environment and sustainability. He's going to be a voice that is missed within the sport. Paris, I know you weren't his biggest fan to start with, but then we started on the chicane and you kind of came over to my side a little bit.
Yeah, I've
So you
definitely
think,
warmed up to him. And I do think it will be like a big shame. And I don't know, I've grown to really respect him. And I think, like you said, it's just all the stuff that he does off the grid that has really made me kind of respect him more on the grid because he's always been a good driver. Like he had that downturn at Ferrari for a few years, but like before that, he was amazing at Red Bull and he's got 4 world championships. And, I just didn't like him because he was at Red Bull and I just don't like the team. Not even the team, because I actually like the team. It's just Horner, like a couple of people. Um, yeah, I don't know, it was a difficult kind of feelings that I had towards Vettel before we started on the chicane. And then I think even like I said, like slightly before, more so like during 2020 when he really supported Lewis and he was kind of paying more attention to the social issues and stuff around the sport. And I think, Aston really pulled it together the last few races. So he even kind of showed that he still has a bit of fire in the engine. He's just taking the time now to be a dad and look after his bees. And apparently Sky F1 got him alpacas. They got him some alpacas for his farm. I'm not even joking. He actually, to be honest, I feel like he had like the best send off. He did a fun run around the track with like 200 people. Um, he did a ton of interviews. Like, if you haven't listened to his Beyond the Grid, I think I said it last week, like, it's really, really good. He did lots of just like little fun things for his fans. So he had like everybody, you could pay and you could buy a little picture of yourself on his helmet so that when he
my
drove
colleague was on
across,
his helmet.
oh wow, that's
Shout
like
out,
really
Haley.
cool. Um, and what else did he do? I was just thought of he swapped helmets with like other drivers. So he had like all of his helmets from I think this season, probably bar the last one, which he probably wants to keep. And he swapped them with a number of the other drivers on the grid. So, I think he had a really, really good send off.
Yeah, I don't think we'll get a better send off than that for any other driver except maybe Lewis.
Yeah.
It was pretty phenomenal. Um, and he's kind of just dominated F1 for the past few weeks in terms of like the news cycle. He will definitely be a driver who's going to be missed. He brought a lot to the sport, and I mean, I guess I just wish him luck in whatever he decides to do next. He's left
Aw,
behind a great legacy.
you're so sweet.
Um, don't make me cry. He's left behind a great legacy, and I think it's just been an honor to be able to actually see him race live as well and witness some of his incredible driving. And I found out this evening, like, just gonna chuck this out there. I have the best colleagues in the world because one of my colleagues has managed to get me a signed cap from Seb, which I get as soon as I next see Jimmy. I don't know when that'll be, but yeah, I'm really
That's so
excited.
cool.
Um,
Um, Well, on to the other driver who you said had like a lot of the other half of the coverage. Not even half because Seb got most of the coverage, but a small portion of it. Danny Rick, like how do you feel about him leaving the grid? And do you think it's a loss for Formula One? What do you feel?
I'm not entirely phased. I'm gutted for him as a driver because I feel like, I mean, I've said this before on our channel, like he definitely had the potential once upon a time to be a world champion. If he'd played his cards right, if he'd been given more of the support that he needed at Red Bull, he definitely could have been a world champion. But I'm not entirely phased. Like, I don't think I don't know, he's not brought much externally like Seb or Lewis have. He's just, got that great enchanting smile that everyone loves and that big personality. But I don't necessarily think I will notice that he's
Mm.
gone next year. Like, I don't think I'll be like, oh, like Ricardo's not there. Whereas with Vettel, I think it'll be very obvious. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. He's staying close to Formula One. He wants to come back. So that is definitely not a goodbye. It is a see you later, as everyone's been saying. So I think we'll just have to wait and see what happens with Ricardo and the cards that he is dealt from now on. But how about you? How do you feel?
Pretty much the same as you. Like I said, I don't think it's a massive loss for the grid. I think there's lots of new talent. I think, there's only 20 seats on the grid. There's only 20 drivers, and if somebody isn't really performing at all, to me, they don't necessarily deserve to keep the seat. And he's had chances, like he's had 2 years at McLaren. It's not just been like a couple of races and then they get rid of him. Like they really gave him a long chance. And like you said, he's still going to be around. So if there is an opportunity for to look at Nico Hulkenberg, how many times has he come back into Formula One? So who knows? Like Nico Hulkenberg's been biding his time as a reserve driver, jumping in for all the different people who've been sick and stuff, and now he's got a drive. So who knows what could happen to Daniel Ricciardo in the future? But I don't think it's that big of an issue. I'm really intrigued to see some of the new drivers that are coming in and see how things are changing and see some new stuff and new people.
Yeah, I do think it'll be really interesting to see how Piastri performs at McLaren and see what that dynamic is there,
Yeah,
considering obviously how it's kind of played out for Ricardo. It'll be really, really interesting because he's obviously young, Norris is young, so I am really intrigued as to what's going to happen there.
but on that
Uh,
note, actually, when it comes to Mick Schumacher, I do think they should have given him a little bit more of a chance.
yeah, I can see that. I also there is a part of me that thinks maybe he just isn't ready.
Yeah,
I don't think it's the end of the road for Schumacher either. I do think he'll come back when he's probably a bit stronger, a bit more ready, a bit more mentally prepared, more so
mm,
than I think for him it was more of a mental challenge than it was anything else because
yeah,
he's got a massive name to live up to.
yeah,
And then, he has one bad weekend and that kind of develops into another bad weekend and then another bad weekend. So it's kind of hard to get out of that cycle. And then you've got someone who, you're racing against someone who's dropped halfway through the season, and then they bring back a very experienced driver who has much more knowledge than Schumacher. And
mm,
he's obviously going to do better than him. So I do feel bad for Mick. But like I say, I don't think it's the end of the road for him. I do think he'll be back just when he's probably matured a little bit and he's got a bit more of the knowledge that he needs, maybe. But yeah,
yeah,
I can imagine he's got very big boots to fill, so it can't be easy for him.
definitely. So let's wrap up our Abu Dhabi race recap. We've touched on kind of the race and how well Leclerc did to get into P2 in the championship. Obviously, Max won the championship and he actually broke the world record for most race wins in a season. By getting 15 race wins. Yeah, like kudos to the Red Bull team, as we always say, they do really well. Um, Drop your happy commentary below because I'm not going to say very much more than that. So yeah, I think for who are your winners and losers of the weekend?
I'm going to give my loser of the weekend to Checo for losing out in second place. And I'm going to give my winner of the weekend to Charles for winning second place. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Damn. Okay. I'm gonna give my loser of the weekend to Nicholas Latifi, because which is not a massive, not like one that's like glaringly obvious, but he DNF'd in his last race in F1. He's probably never gonna get back into another F1 car. And he spun again, which just was just like traumatic in itself, seeing that like go round and round and round. So I was like, oh wait, well, round once. But uh yeah, I think for me, loser of the weekend. And for my winner of the weekend, I'm going to give it to Charles as well. I just think he was really like it was really good. Actually, no, sorry, scratch that. For my winner of the weekend, I'm going to give it to Seb Vettel, because I think he just had like a lovely send off, and I think he deserves flowers that he got. So yeah, let's just do like a tiny bit of a wrap up for the year, on top of our lovely wrap up for the race. So, do you have a most memorable race of the season?
You know, I'm so bad at remembering like
I'm
races
putting
and
you on the
moments.
spot. Was it like, I don't know, Brazil, which was very recent memory, or Bahrain or Azerbaijan? Just
I can't remember any. I can't remember any of them except from Brazil because that was only a few weeks ago. So I'm just going to give it to Brazil, but I don't want to give it to Brazil because I know there are other exciting races, but I can't think of them. So I'm going to give it to Brazil.
okay. I think for me, I would give it to Brazil because it genuinely was the like greatest race of the year. Um, but instead, I'm going to give it to I think Hungary, which was also a pretty decent race. Although I can't actually remember off the top of my head what happened, but I remember it was a really good race. So yeah. Great content creators we
I
are.
know, we're so good at this.
So good at this. Um, then what was okay, so maybe this might be a bit easier. Do you have a most memorable moment of the year?
Again, this was very recent, but that's not the reason that it's my most memorable moment. I just think for me, George's win,
Mhm.
kind of working on that content and stuff over the weekend and like seeing it kind of fold and play out and whatever happened, I think it was just amazing. Just being a part of the team that was delivering some of that content and yeah, seeing it play out, I think that was pretty epic and just really exciting and a big moment for George. So I think that's one of my memorable moments for the season. What about you?
There was a really, really great overtake of Lewis Hamilton on Fernando Alonso in, I want to say Monza, because I was there and I remember just like being really excited and screaming. I think for me, like obviously because I was physically at the race, that also kind of has more of a visceral memory for me, even though honestly that was one of the most diabolical races of my life that I've ever been to, because it was just so crowded and horrible. But race wise, like actually on track racing, Lewis's overtake on Alonso was just like, thank you very much. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Um, and then last question for you, as an overall, we always do our winners and losers, but who was your driver of the entire year?
I feel like because you know me, you're going to know why I've chosen this person. But yeah, I'm going to go with Lance Stroll. Uh,
Okay.
just because I have seen him really pick it up this year.
Yeah.
He's not in the best car. He's got a lot of pressure for being daddy's boy with daddy's money in a
Hmm.
rich sport, you know, whatever. But I've seen he actually really does want to be there,
Yeah.
and he really does try. And for him to finish 8th in the last race of the season to come ahead of Seb, I think, he's trying, and he's getting, like, slowly Aston Martin have picked it up over the last few races, and he's showing that he deserves to be part of that team. So yeah, I'm gonna give it to Lance Stroll. He's faced a tough year, but he's kind of just gone with it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really like about Lance Stroll is that you genuinely can't just call him a paid driver. Like, he is a paid driver, and we know that that's the reason he's in Formula One, because he has his dad's money, but he actually does have talent. And I really
Yeah.
appreciate that compared to like a whole bunch of other drivers that we could name. But like, I think
Mazepin.
Mazepin, Latifi, Pastor Maldonado, like there's so many drivers in the history of F1 that have just been in there because of the money. And I genuinely like really appreciate the fact that Lance Stroll actually cares about his racecraft, and actually you can see improvement. Um, so yeah, like I think that's a really, really great one, to be honest. Um, my driver of the year is still going to have to be Lewis Hamilton. Um, I say it with a slight reservation in my tone, and that is simply because obviously he didn't score as well as we want. He didn't beat his teammate. He didn't win a championship, but I think he really showed what leadership qualities are if you're in an F1 team, like how to galvanize a team and get them from point A to point B by the end of the year. Like, they had a marked improvement. There was 6 races on the trot towards the end of the season where he was on the podium. So I genuinely think that a lot of that was because of him. And, he uplifted the team, and what Mercedes were able to achieve was because of him. So obviously all of the really hardworking engineers and everybody in the team, but there's always room for improvement, specifically their pit stops and their strategies, but we will go into that next year. And yeah, I really love to see it, and I can't wait to see what they do next year.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty well-deserved winner of driver of the year. Um, but I suppose that is it for
Yeah.
our last race review of the season. Thank God. Um, it's been so long, guys, and so difficult, but thank you so much for sticking with us and bearing with us. We are planning lots of different things for next year. There's going to be a slight change in the way that we do things, a slight change in what we bring to you, but hopefully it will be just as engaging, if not more. And yeah, we're looking forward to delivering more to you guys next year, hopefully. But yeah, as I say, thank you so much for sticking with us this season. Thank you so much for all the engagement and your comments and your feedback. It's been so great connecting with so many of you. And it's just amazing to see what we've achieved within just another year. We've only been doing this for 2 years, and yeah, there's some really great people that we've connected with. So we genuinely cannot thank you enough. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled for more to come, hopefully.
Yeah, and don't forget to follow us on all our socials. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to our videos. Catch us at On the Chicane on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and especially YouTube, which is still our main platform for how we connect with you guys. So, as Mariam said, thank you so much for sticking with us, and see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.